Good morning, everyone. I'm Meredith. I'm the lead pastor here at The Well. If you are watching us online or on the app, you can go ahead and fill out the digital connect card and let us know that you're here and how we can pray for you. And if you're a regular attender here and you have our app, you can also fill out our digital connect card and let us know how we can pray for you and any other information you might need. So my daughter Imogen is now 10, and she's actually sitting in today. But when she was about 2, it was nap time, right? And those of you who have 2-year-olds, you know that nap time is tenuous, right? Because you're never sure how it's going to go. And so I was bringing her upstairs, and I said, it's rest time now, and we're all going to rest. She goes, you're going to rest, Mama? I'm like, yep, I'm going to rest too. And I went back downstairs, and I was at the dining room table. I'm working on my computer, and then, probably 10 minutes later, there's a little Imogen right at my elbow, and she goes, oh, you're not resting. Mama, you are not resting. And I was like, oh no. I was busted. And technically, I wanted to say, technically I am resting from you, but I don't think that would have sat well with my 2-year-old. And when I saw her face register, someone can say something and do something else, I thought, oh man, I better be really careful that my words and my actions line up as best to my ability. And that's the thing about lying, is I didn't mean to lie. That was an inadvertent lie, but we lie all the time. All the time. In fact, researchers have looked at this left and right, and they say that people lie on average 2 to 4 times a day. And on average, you are lied to anywhere between 10 and 200 times a day, depending on how many people you interact with. And 60% of people think it's okay to lie to spare someone's feelings. And 20% of people think it's okay to lie to cover up some sort of mistake, to make sure that you don't get in trouble for it. And actually, some researchers did this project where they had people meet new people, and they found that they played the tape back afterwards, and the people who were talking realized that they lied anywhere between 2 and 3 times within 10 minutes, and most of them didn't even realize that they were lying. And so when we lie, sometimes we don't realize it, sometimes we justify it, we rationalize it and think this is, it's better this way. But lying in and of itself is a relationship killer. It kills relationships, and we're going to look at that today, because the more we lie, like little kids, anyone who's been around a little kid and you see them lie, you're like, they're real bad liars, right? Did you touch that? No. And you're like, obviously you did, and your face is showing that. But the more you lie, the stimulus of reaction goes down. And so that's why as you get older, you can lie and not even realize that you're stretching the truth, or that you're exaggerating, or that you said something you're like, actually, I don't even know why I said that, because that reaction gets less. And so here's the thing about lying, is that it's an attitude. It's an attitude. And when we look at relationships, last week we looked at possessiveness, and we said that the attitude behind possessiveness is you belong to me. You belong to me, so I'm in charge, I get my way. And when it comes to lying, the attitude of heart there is, I am more important than you. I am more important than you. My needs, my comfort, my desire is more important than your feelings or the response that my words would cause for you. I am more important than you. And we lie for 2 reasons. There's 2 main motivations. Either it is to avoid pain or to seek gain. Right? We lie to avoid pain, which is a self-preservation of, I'm afraid what will happen if you find out the truth. I'm afraid that I will get in trouble. I'm afraid that you will think less of me. I'm afraid that I will lose something that's important to me. And so I want to avoid pain. And so I use lying as a strategy to avoid that. Or I want to seek gain, meaning I think that there's a benefit for me. If you look at me a certain way, maybe I'll get something, maybe I'll get promoted, maybe I'll get a date, you never know. And so we think, oh, there's something in it for me. And so we lie either for self-preservation or self-promotion. But in both cases, whether we realize it or not, we're telling the other person, your feelings and your experience are not as important as my feelings and my experience. You're dishonoring the other person. Andy Stanley says this about lying. First, lying dishonors the one to whom the lie is told. Lying communicates protecting me is more important than honoring you. Secondly, lying devalues the recipient. Lying says, you're not worth the truth. Lastly, lying breaks the relationship. And so Jesus tells us, excuse me, Steve, can you hand me my water? I got a little something stuck in my throat. I'm very sorry. It's going to be a long sermon if I have to cough this whole time. So I'm going to take a little sip. I'll just leave it there. Okay, so Jesus tells us that lying is deeper than just bad behavior, that there's a heart issue at the core of lying. And he says this. He says, but the words you speak come from the heart. That's what defiles you. For from the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, all sexual immorality, theft, lying, and slander. Right? And so we put like all those other things, like I'm not those things, and then we put lying in there, we're like, maybe, right? And what he's telling us is that lying is a result of a heart that is misaligned with God. It's no longer aligned with God, it's aligned with sin. And this shouldn't surprise us. This shouldn't surprise us because our relationship gets broken with God because of a lie. Right? We're told in Genesis, there's Adam and there's Eve and there's the Garden of Eden, and then the serpent comes along and starts to sow doubt about the goodness of God and says, God's holding back from you. God doesn't want what's best for you. And when Jesus talks about Satan, who is the serpent, he says this, he was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native tongue, for he is a liar and the father of lies. And so this serpent comes along, Satan comes along and says, God doesn't love you, God's not for you, God's not on your side. And when Adam and Eve believe that lie, when they reach for their own self-sufficiency and say, oh, no, I can be my own God, the relationship is broken. And that's when sin enters the story, and that's what sin does. Sin disrupts relationship. It disconnects us. It breaks things apart. It divides us. Excuse me. Sally Lloyd-Jones in the Jesus Storybook Bible, she calls this the great lie. And I love how she words it. She says this, and a terrible lie came into the world, and it would never leave. It would live in every human heart, whispering to every one of God's children, God doesn't love me. And at the heart of lying is really fear. It's fear. It's fear that God doesn't love me and I'm all on my own. There's no one looking out for me. That I have to get it myself. I have to protect myself, and I have to get all the gains for myself. That God doesn't love me. And you can read the Adam and Eve story through that lens of like God gets mad at him, God kicks him out and says, good luck, right? But that's a lie in and of itself too, because what we really see is that God provides for them on the way out. And God says, actually, you have to leave because I want something more for you than the state that you're in. But when we believe this lie, the fear of God doesn't love me, I'm all on my own, so I have to avoid as much pain as I possibly can, and I have to seek as much gain as I possibly can, all on my own. I have to look out for myself. And that begins to justify dishonesty because it's a self-preservation. It's self-protection. I have to do this. I have to look out for me. And we see this disruption in relationships show up in two different ways. We lie to ourselves and we lie to others. So let's talk about first how we lie to ourselves, because this is really dishonesty of the heart. You know, where I'm not telling myself the truth. Then I see this show up in three ways. We downplay, we dismiss, and we deny. And so when we downplay, it's like we have a blind spot in our life that sometimes it's knowingly, like I just don't want to see it, and sometimes it's unknowingly, but there's a problem, there's problematic patterns or behaviors that pop up, and we downplay it. You think, it's not that big of a deal. So there are some of you who are always late. And you know who you are. You're always, I'll be there. You look at your watch and you're like, it only takes about 15 minutes. I could get there in 10. I can get there in 10. And you're always late. And here's the thing. You are lying to yourself when you think, it's not that I'm always late. There's always a reason. There's always a reason why you're late, right? But the truth is, you're saying, I'm more important than you. I am more important than you. You are not important enough for me to actually look at how I spend time, how I order my day, and to tell you the truth that I'm not going to show up on time. Or even just to be honest that I'm always 5 minutes late. Just plan for me to be 5 minutes late. I have a friend that I call it Josh time. My friend Josh, I'm like, we're always on Josh time when Josh is around, which is, anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes later than what we say that we are. And it's a joke, but it's also like, when you aren't willing to look at a pattern in your own life, you start lying to everyone else. So when we downplay something and we say, it's not really that big of a deal. And sometimes it's a pattern, sometimes it's a trait, sometimes it's a habit, sometimes it's a season. That you're in a season of life where you're like, I can't be reliable, I can't commit, but instead of actually acknowledging it to yourself, you downplay it and you end up misrepresenting yourself and leading others to believe or rely on you when you're actually not reliable. And the next way that we do this is we dismiss it. And this is where we start to get feedback around this pattern, and we think, nope, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. That doesn't line up with how I want to see myself or how I want to see others. So I knew a woman, and her mother died tragically when she was in high school. And her mom was just one of those people who was super hospitable and loved to have people over and loved to throw big parties. And this woman wanted so desperately to be like her mother, right? And so she would invite people over, but she was a terrible hostess. And she did not like having people over, and it was very uncomfortable. She was very controlling, and it was very uptight. And anytime that she got feedback about that, she was like, nope, that can't be true because I want to see myself in this particular way. And so we can dismiss our own response, our own reaction, and say, nope, that can't be true because I'm so committed to a particular image of myself. Or we can dismiss this around other people where we think, nope, I want to feel this way. I want to assume this about this person. We can do this in our own personal lives, and we can do this with public figures, right? We get information about a public figure that should change our opinion, but we go, I don't really want that. That is inconvenient with my worldview, so I'm going to dismiss it and put it over here. And the reality is we're just lying to ourselves because we're so committed to painting a particular picture, having a particular experience, that we don't want this feedback that doesn't fit. And this is what we see with social media all the time, of people who, when we talk about getting brainwashed or going down a rabbit hole, but often is, I want to believe that this is true. I want to believe this is true, so I'm going to keep reinforcing that. So we dismiss anything that says something contrary. And then the last way that we lie to ourselves is that we just flat out deny things, where we won't even acknowledge it. We won't see it. This is where there might be a pattern, but there's always a reason, and you're never at fault. You're never at fault. There's always a justification for why this happens. And where I see this most commonly is with people who have a pattern of broken relationships in their wake. And there's always a reason why this person was wrong, and so now I had to cut off from them, and then this person was wrong, and I had to cut off from them, and then this person, and it's always someone else. And when I meet these people, I always say to them, you are the common denominator in your life. So if you have a pattern of broken relationships in your life, it is either because there's something that you are doing to break those relationships, or you are not discerning about who you are entering into relationship with. But one way or another, you have a role to play in this scenario. But when we deny it, I worked with someone who would say regularly, I'm hard to work with, And so there was this it looked like there was acceptance about, who he was, but then every time someone would get fired or someone would leave a team or someone would get upset, it was always them. It was always that other person. When it's you are hard to work with, and you are creating this dynamic. So when we deny things, this is flat out, I won't look at it, I won't acknowledge it, it's not me. We perpetuate unhealthy patterns and habits in our lives. And all three of these, again, when you lie to yourself, you inevitably lie to others. That is just how it works. If you misrepresent yourself, if you promise something that you actually have no intention of promising, if you say I'm going to be on time and you're never on time, you are lying. You are lying. There is a dishonesty there that you're not meaning to hurt others necessarily, but you inevitably do. So dishonesty with ourselves, dishonesty in our own heart will break relationship with other people. It causes disruption. Dostoevsky in the Brothers Karamazov says it. I love this. He says, above all, don't lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to the point that he cannot distinguish between the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and for others. And having no respect, he ceases to love. And so when we lie to ourselves, the reason why it disrupts relationship is we are not loving other people. We are saying, I am more important than you. My desires, my worldview, the way that I've oriented my own opinion is more important than you. And we cease to love. So that's how we lie to ourselves. But the other way that this shows up is that we lie to others. We actually, not just lying to ourselves and then leading to others, but we lie to others. And James Bryan Smith says this: lying is not about the correctness of what a person says, but about the intent of the heart. And this is where we are misleading people with word and action. This is a dishonesty of word and action. And I see this show up in several ways. So fabrication, omission, exaggeration, flattery, and white lies. So fabrication, this is when you just make something up, right? And this is the most common form of lying that we see with children. I remember when Imogen was really young and she'd start saying something like, okay, is this reality or is this a story? Where are we at? That's how we worked it. But when I was little, I had a pen pal. Anyone ever had a pen pal? Some of you are like, pen pal? Like you'd write a letter on paper? But, I'm older than a lot of you in this room. And so we had pen pals, and you had paper, and you wrote a letter to this other person. And I don't know why I decided, but I decided that I had a whole other backstory to my life, maybe because I grew up in small town New Hampshire and it wasn't very exciting. So I told this person that my name was not Meredith. It was secretly Helen, because that seemed like a very exotic name when I was like 8 or 9, and that I was from England, but I had to hide my accent. So I told this whole story. And I wasn't thinking I want to lie to this person, but I wanted them to believe this story about me. And so fabrication, can be really big things. It can be small things, but it's when we just make things up that just aren't true. We pulled it out of thin air, right? So there's fabrication, but then there's some nuancing, okay? And there's omission. And omission is when we leave out a key detail, mainly because it makes us look better, right? So we leave out a key detail that sheds a favorable light on us. For example, my father, when he was younger, he has an older brother, and his older brother, Gary, and my dad were fighting out in the yard, and my dad came in and found my grandmother and said, Mom, Gary hit me, right? Which was true. What he left out is, in retaliation, he shoved Gary down, kicked him, and ended up breaking his ankle, right? And so, that's an extreme omission of, he looks more like the victim if he just says, Gary hit me, and doesn't share his part. But we can fall into the lie of omission when we tell a story in a certain way, and we either overemphasize, our goodness, because we overemphasize that other person, what they did wrong, right? And so maybe we leave out something that we said or something that how we responded so that we look better. And when we lie by omission, what we're doing is we're allowing someone else to arrive at their own conclusion, right? We're letting them fill in the blanks. And so it doesn't necessarily feel like a lie because I didn't say it. You just assumed that. So we can be dishonest through omission. We can be dishonest through exaggeration. Over 30% of people exaggerate on their resume in order to get a job, right? And so we can stretch the truth a little bit. And again, it can look really big, but it can look really small. I might have worked 2 hours, but I'll say I worked 5, because it felt like I worked 5. Or, I just stretch my expense report just a little bit. I add mileage to things. Or, we begin to justify our own response to say, well, I'm worth it. This is important enough that I want someone to think this way about me. I want someone to assume these things about me. And so we stretch the truth and we allow people to see something that maybe isn't quite there. And then we have flattery. And this is different than complimenting. Okay, complimenting is a genuine way to express appreciation or something that you notice about someone. Flattery is more manipulative. Flattery is when it's excessive praise or it's insincere in order to get someone to think about me favorably. It's for my own benefit. And we can use flattery to kind of grease the wheels of a situation or endear ourselves to a boss or a superior or someone else, who maybe we're a little intimidated by. So I think, well, I'll just find these ways to make this person feel really, really good about themselves because then they'll think I'm really, really good, right? And so flattery is not trying to further the relationship. It's trying to further yourself. It's using that person in order for them to think a certain way about you. And then the last one is white lies. And these are the ones that we tell most often, right? Because the reason why we tell them is to go, it doesn't hurt anyone. It's not hurting anyone. I mean, it's just more convenient. It's more convenient if I say I'm not home, or I'm busy, or I make an excuse, or, I see this with parents all the time, parents. When you're like, the batteries are broken. We're all out of batteries. All the batteries in the whole house went away. I don't know. Then the battery store is closed. Every battery store is closed. So sorry, nothing we can do, right? Or like, if you don't stop, I'm going to write to Santa, and I'm going to tell Santa what you're doing. And you're like, you're not going to write to Santa. You aren't going to do that. You don't have his address, And so, but we do this because it's easier, right? There's no harm. There's no harm in it. And so these white lies, they're convenient. They seem to just smooth over a situation that feels a little bit tricky for us. But here's the thing. I've never met anyone who said, you know what, it didn't feel so bad when I found out I was lied to because it was a white lie. It was just a little lie, right? If you found out that someone lied to you, you wouldn't be like, well, it was just a little lie, so that feels okay. No, it doesn't feel good to be lied to. There's no white lies when you're on the other side of it, right? Lies hurt because lies mislead people. That's the whole point. And so in all of these scenarios, we can rationalize it. We can justify it. There's a reason why it might be a skill or a strategy that we go to. But what Jesus tells us is lying isn't neutral. It's not a neutral thing. Lying is when our heart is misaligned with God, so it is aligned with sin. All sin disrupts. All sin breaks relationship. That is the nature of sin. And so we can't just say, well, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. But here's the thing. The remedy to this is not just to behave yourself better and just stop lying. Don't tell those white lies and just get yourself in line. Because the problem is it's a heart issue. That's what Jesus tells us. He says it's not just a behavior issue. It comes from the heart. And so the remedy also has to be a heart issue. It has to happen at the heart level. And that is exactly what Jesus does for us, right? This lie broke our relationship. Sin leaves us exiled. It leaves us at odds with God. And Jesus has come to restore and reconcile that relationship, to bring us back into relationship with God, to make that better. And those lies of God doesn't love me and I'm all on my own, if we look at what Jesus has done, he addresses those directly because he says, God loves you so much that he gave up everything to be with you. God loves you so much that he died so you can have life. And Jesus says, you will never be alone. Surely I will never leave you. To the very end of the age, I'm always with you. Right? And so we see in Jesus that he's come not just to say, hey, all of you, get your act together. Stop lying to each other. Stop having affairs. Knock all this stuff off. He's saying, no, I've come to change you from the inside out. None of this is going to get fixed on your own. You are not on your own. You can't fix it on your own. That's the good news of the gospel, that Jesus has come to set us right, to make it so that we can live the way that he wants us to live. We said last week, he's the new standard of relationship, but that's not something that you are striving for. It's something that he makes possible for us. And so with Jesus, suddenly we look and we think, we don't have to lie to avoid pain or seek gain. Because when it comes to avoiding pain, he says, I've taken all that away from you. He says there's no condemnation for those who are in Jesus, right? There's no condemnation for us. And that the greatest penalty that we would have had to pay is death, and that's gone. So there is, yes, you might experience temporary discomfort, but the reality is there's nothing to fear with Jesus. And to seek gain, we're told nothing is withheld. There's been nothing withheld from you. It's all been given for you. And so we are able, when we step into the gospel, to live differently. And last week we talked about how in Jesus we're setting up a new society. And we looked at the household codes and how these households are now having to figure out how do we be in relationship with one another because Jesus is at the center of our lives. And that there's a new standard. And Paul continues around this, trying to help this new society figure out what does it look like to be in relationship with one another, to be reconciled to one another. When we're reconciled to God, we're reconciled to each other. And he talks about lying in 2 of his letters. And the first one we're going to look at is in Colossians. And he says this, do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. And Paul says, so don't lie to each other. Why? Not because it's wrong and it's bad and you need to knock it off. He says, because you've taken off this old self. And the image that he uses is like a set of clothing. You've taken that off. You're not wearing that anymore. And the practices that go with it. And that word self can also be translated as humanity. And so he says, you've taken off that old humanity, the humanity that is aligned with sin, the humanity that is patterned after Adam. You're not wearing that anymore. And so the practices that go with that aren't yours anymore. You've taken those off. And what have you done? You've put on the same language of putting something on, a new set of clothing, a new identity, this new humanity. And this new humanity is patterned after Jesus. It's patterned after the way of Jesus. And so you're not that old person anymore. You're this new person. So this doesn't make any sense to behave that way. And then he adds this tension in this passage because he says, you are being renewed into the image of your creator, into the likeness of your creator and the knowledge of God. And what he means there is that it's this tension between there's divine agency. You are being renewed, not you're renewing yourself. You're being renewed. God is changing you from the inside out. Yes, you are this new self, and you're being formed into this new self. You're being made into who you were always intended to be. You're coming back home. So there's divine agency and there's human responsibility. So stop lying to one another. There's choice in that. And he goes on further in Ephesians. He says it even more clearly. He says, therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. And right before this, he says the same thing of the old self is gone, the new self is here, you're this new self. Therefore, put off falsehood. Take that off. And he's emphasizing the individual responsibility within community. Saying, within community, you have to choose. Your choices matter because you are now being patterned after the way of Jesus. And so your behavior should follow that pattern. That's why we don't lie to each other. Not why because it's wrong. He says, why? Because you are members of one another. And this is where we see the new attitude of heart start to show up. Because the attitude of heart around lying is, I'm more important than you. My comfort, my desires, my experience is more important than you. And what we see in Jesus is to say, actually, we are all essential to one another. We are all essential to one another. No one is more important than the other. That to hurt someone else is to hurt yourself. It's like he's saying, you're all members. You're all members of one body. It's the same idea of a limb in your body. You don't hurt your hand and think it's separate from you. It's your hand, right? If you hurt your hand, you hurt. That's what he's saying. If you hurt one another, all of you hurt. You are all essential. This is the new attitude of heart that we're given because of Jesus. We're being transformed. We're being renewed into this image. We're being we're enabled to live this other way. And now, let me be really clear. The remedy is not radical honesty, right? There's this movement of radical honesty that you tell the truth no matter what. Doesn't matter what anybody thinks or feels. And let's give a couple examples here. All right, let's go back to the era of Nazis. Because there are some people who say, no, if Nazis knocked on your door and you're a follower of Jesus and you're harboring innocent Jewish people and they say, do you have Jewish people? You should say, yep, we sure do. Here, I'm going to turn them over for you to torture and kill them unnecessarily, right? No. We would say, is lying good? Lying's not good. Is it the lesser evil? Sure. Is it the lesser evil? So sometimes there are cases where withholding the truth is the right thing to do. And this is also not an excuse to be brutally honest, right? Where you can walk up to someone and be like, I really don't like your shirt. Or that haircut looks super bad on you. Like that's not the remedy. That's not what Paul's calling for, right? Is to just go and say things no matter what. I feel this way, so I should say it because it's true. No. What is the point? The point is love. The point is unity. And we're talking about integrity. We're talking about being trustworthy. And we're talking about unity. And so integrity is this, I am consistent. When I show up here, I'm the same person as when I show up here, as when I show up here. There might be different responses that are appropriate. Like showing up as a parent is different than showing up as a boss, right? You're going to have what's appropriate in that realm, but I'm still the same person. There's a consistency. And so integrity is about being consistent, not changing and adapting to like, oh, what do you want me to be? And who do you want me to be? And I'll reflect back to you, whatever it is that's going to get me ahead. That's not honesty. And then, trustworthy. It's not about just getting people to trust you. Because all sorts of, people who are trying to take advantage of you, well, you'll trust them. Lots of people trusted Bernie Madoff, right? That doesn't mean that he was trustworthy. It's about being worthy of trust. And being worthy of trust means that you do what you say, that your words and your actions line up, that people can take you at your word. And all of this is about building up unity, meaning that trust is the foundation of all meaningful relationships. If you do not have trust, you will not go anywhere. And trust means I can rely on you. I can believe in you. I know that you are for me and that you're working towards my good. And so sometimes being a person of integrity who is trustworthy and is committed to unity means you don't always share what you know, right? Gossip might be true, doesn't mean that you should share it. And Steve and I have been in experiences where we've been mistreated and people wanted the details, right? They wanted to know what happened. And so, when that happens, you so desperately want to share, right? You want to share and be like, let me tell you how wronged I was. But when we stood back, we realized it's not going to benefit anyone. It's not going to benefit us. We're not going to look any better from it. And it's definitely not going to benefit the community. And so we just have to trust that our integrity will speak for itself and that the truth will make itself known, right? This was not a situation where, someone was in danger and we didn't speak up. It was one of these things where it's we could tell our side of the story, but it's not really going to benefit anyone. So sometimes withholding what is true can be loving because the whole point is to build trust, is to be trustworthy. And so what does that look like to put off falsehood and to speak truthfully to one another? What does that look like in practice? And I've got a few ways that we can do that. And the first is to be reflective. To be reflective. And this is about getting honest with yourself. This is about stepping back and really taking an honest look at who you are and how you are choosing to live. Because remember, if you are lying to yourself, you are lying to everyone else around you, whether you mean to or not. And Paul says it this way, because of the privilege and authority God has given me, I give each of you this warning. Do not think you are better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us. And that means that we have to be honest in the evaluation of ourselves, means we have to be willing to look at the patterns in our lives. Remember, you are the common denominator in your life. If there is a pattern that's going on, then you have some part to play in it. You have some role that you are playing in that. And this also means that we need to welcome feedback, that honest, trustworthy feedback that helps us see these patterns. And so a small way this happened in my life, I had a mentor who came to me one day and said, you lie on your voicemail. And I was like, what do you mean I lie on my voicemail? He said, on your voicemail, you say that you will call people back as soon as you possibly can. He said, you have never returned a voicemail I have left you. And I'm like, you are so right. I have this mental block when it comes to voicemail. I will listen to it. I might intend to call you back, but I don't. I forget them. I don't like voicemails. So eventually, years ago, I changed my voicemail. And if you were to call my phone and get my voicemail, it says, please don't leave me a voicemail. I probably won't. I check in frequently. I probably won't get back to you. Here's the other ways to get in touch with me. And that's just a small way, but it was a small thing to be like, you know what, you're right. I'm lying. I am not going to get back to you. And I'm telling all of you, if you leave me a voicemail, I'm not going to get back to you. That's not going to happen. So there's other ways to get in touch with me, but that's not the way to do it. And so how can you step back and say, what's really true? And maybe what's really true of you is I'm always late. I'm always late. And you know what? The truth is I'm not willing to rearrange my schedule to be on time. So I'm just going to tell you, I'm probably going to be 5 minutes late. That's just how I roll. I'm sorry. Part of it is I just can't seem to get my act together. Sometimes it's a season, and you're like, I have little kids, and I always say if you have little kids, you're in the ish season of life. I'll be there 3-ish, depending on tantrums, shoes, food, potty breaks, all that stuff, right? And sometimes it's just being honest of I don't like making commitments. I'm bad at commitments. If I get bored, I'm probably going to bail. So maybe you shouldn't put me in a role that's you really need to rely on me because I'm probably not going to be great at that. Be honest. And if you don't like it, then find a way to get some help to change it, right? If there's a pattern that you are actually, I don't want to be an unreliable person, well, you don't have to be an unreliable person, but just ignoring it and pretending that you're reliable is not changing that, right? And so be reflective, invite feedback, and if you see patterns that are destructive or harmful or working against you, there are ways to get help with that. You don't have to be stuck there. You don't have to be stuck. So the first way is to get honest with yourself. The next thing is be genuine. And Jesus says that people should be able to take us at our word. And in his day, people would swear on a greater authority to show that they were sincere. Right? And people still do that today. And I'm like, I swear on my mother's grave. You're like, please don't do that. Like, don't, and especially if she's alive. Like, don't do that. But Jesus says this: let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. And what he means is your word should be enough. Your word should be enough. It should carry enough weight on its own that if you say yes, people know that you mean it. And if you say no, people know that you mean it. You don't need to call in a greater authority so people really know you're sincere. People should know that you're sincere. And what does this mean? It means that when you say something, you mean it. You're genuine about it. People know you mean what you say. So if you say you're going to call someone back and you don't do it, you're not being genuine. If you say, I'm going to complete that task by this date and you don't, then you're not being genuine. Be honest in your commitments. Be able to say what is true, right? That people can rely on you. To forget the task is to forget the person. And all of you have been on the receiving end of that. When someone said they're going to do something and then they didn't, and you didn't feel like, oh, no big deal. It hurt. It hurts. And so be honest. If you can't commit to something, then be honest in your no. Don't say yes when you mean no, and don't say no when you could do it and you're just being lazy. Like, be sincere in what you tell people. Be genuine in what you commit to. And with parents, this is about committing to being honest, right? White lies, I see this all the time. Parents, I teach a class on lying, right? And parents will come and be like, my kid's lying. I'm like, okay, great. How often have you lied too, right? Because as parents, if we use lying to make things easier for ourselves, and then we get indignant when our children lie, and you're like, it doesn't work that way, right? You have to model honesty. You have to commit to it. And sometimes that means being uncomfortable in your own life, but saying, I'm not more important than you. And I'm going to choose honesty, because if I don't model it, I can't expect it. Right? This is about choosing to be honest in your conversations as well. Like job interviews, be genuine. If you're not good at something, be honest about it, because how you get something is how you keep it. Right? If you get something by lying, you're going to have to keep lying to keep it. And I know for myself, when I was in between jobs, I was so tempted so many times to downplay something about myself, or like say, I could kind of fit into your box and like maybe misrepresent myself a little bit. And Steve continually said to me, if you do that, if you try to fit into their mold and you're not honest with who you really are, it's going to come out eventually. And that's not going to go well. And so be genuine. Be who you are, and let people trust that you are faithful. And Jesus says this: if you are faithful in the little things, you will be faithful in the large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And so this is like, be honest in your expense reports. Be honest on your timesheets. Be honest. Be someone that people know that what you say matches with what you do. Okay? Be tactful. Often we resort to lying to spare other people's feelings, right? 60% of people think that it's appropriate to lie to spare someone else's feelings. But again, when people realize that they're lied to, nobody feels better about it. And so tact is different than flattery. Flattery is, I'm going to say something to get you to like me or think a certain way. Tact is, I'm speaking with you in mind. I'm speaking with you in mind in a way to maintain or build a relationship, to communicate caring about you, right? And so to stay in good relationship, I'm taking your feelings into consideration. And Paul says this: do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And so rather than figuring out a way to kind of skirt the truth and say something not quite true, we should spend our time trying to think about, how can I actually be tactful here? And so let me give you an example. Someone comes home and they've just painted this amazing painting, right? This beautiful painting that you look and you go, I would not hang that on my wall if you paid me. That is not a beautiful painting. But they say, what do you think of my painting, right? You don't have to say, it's really good. So I love it. Like, that's not true, but you could say, wow, I could see that you worked really hard at that. Like, you could find something in it. Like, I love this one part of it. You could find one thing you appreciate. I love the use of green in that painting. Wow, there's a lot of green in that. Like, really makes me think of spring, right? You can find something you appreciate about it. Because that's the difference between praise, saying, I think it's great and wonderful and good. Appreciation is drawing out something that the other person did. Praise is about you. Appreciation is about them. Like, I can see you really worked hard. Or, wow, you're really proud of that. I can see that you're improving. Maybe they started really, really, really bad, and now they're just kind of bad. So tact is about restraint. It's about what doesn't need to be said, right? And sometimes you feel pressure on the spot, but you can always say, I need some time to think about that. If you're feeling someone's pressuring you, not the painting, but something else where you're feeling like, I have to respond right now. You don't have to respond to that moment. You say, I need a little bit of time to think about that. I'm not quite sure what my opinion is. Or you can thank the person and the intention. Well, like someone gives you a terrible gift, like a really bad gift, and you don't have to be like, wow, this is so great. You can say, wow, thank you so much for thinking of me. I really appreciate that you thought of me. You'd be like, I don't really know why you thought about me this way. But you don't have to say it. That's the restraint, right? That's the tact. And so we can still be honest in our words and be tactful. We don't have to say something that is hurtful. And we should our filter for all of this should be what is beneficial and what will build this person up. Not what will make them think better of me, not what will get me out of this uncomfortable situation, but what's beneficial in this moment. That's what tact is really about. Don't let anything unwholesome kind of come out of your mouth, but that which is beneficial and builds one another up. And lastly, be gracious. Be gracious. And many of us resort to dishonesty because we want to avoid conflict. We think that, I want to maintain the relationship, but not all conflict breaks relationship. That's not true, right? And I don't like conflict. I'm conflict avoidant. I go out of my way to avoid conflict with people, but conflict doesn't have to break relationship. And Paul tells us how to go into conflict, and he says this, rather speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, for whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. And he says part of growing in maturity, part of growing in love is that we speak the truth in love. Not that we skirt the truth in love, but that we speak the truth in love. And sometimes speaking the truth in love means you have to deliver hard news, or you have to say something that doesn't feel great, that you would rather avoid. But speaking the truth in love is committed to one another. And that means that, we're not flattering. We're not trying to avoid it. We're not trying to accuse someone or berate them. So let me give you an example of what it looks like to speak the truth in love. And this is the very first time that Imogen actively lied. Not just like, I didn't touch that, or I don't know, but like actively told the lie to me. And she was about 5, and I had asked her to go upstairs and pick up her room. And she came down after a little while, and she stayed up there for long enough for me to believe her, right? And she came down, I said, did you clean your room? She goes, yep, I did. I said, okay, great. And I trusted her because she hadn't lied to me. And so later we went up, and I came in, and nothing, like her room had not been cleaned at all. Not a single thing. And I was like, oh no. And like the first response is like, how could you? I feel so betrayed, right? But I gave myself some time and stepped back from it. And here's the thing, parents, often we set our kids up to lie to us because we know what's true, and we come to them, we ask them a question like, did you clean your room, right? And then they go, no, they lied to me, I can't believe it. And you're like, you set them up, right? So don't ask a question that you know the answer to. That's being dishonest. So I came to her and I said, Imogen, this is what I see. Your room is not cleaned up, and I feel hurt that you told me that it was, right? Be honest. Be honest. Don't set people up to lie to you. Right? If you know that they've already done something, be honest with what you know. So, and immediately, just crumpled and started crying. She goes, Mom, I'm so sorry. I just didn't know how to clean my room. Like, she just got too overwhelmed, and she didn't know how to clean it, right? And so we sat down, and we first talked about honesty and why honesty matters. And I said, listen, this is about trust. It's about building a foundation of trust. And I want to be able to trust that what you say is true, right? And there's gonna come a point in life where you need me to trust your words. Where someone might be speaking something opposite of you. And trust is built over a pattern, right? And then we talked about the commitment to honesty in our house. To say we are committed to being honest even when it's hard. Even when it's hard. Mom and Dad are committed to being honest to you, even when it's hard, and we ask you to be committed to being honest with us. And here's the deal. We never punish honesty. That's a commitment in our house. We don't punish honesty. If you tell the truth, we're not going to punish you for whatever happened. There might be a result that you don't like of the decision you made. I might not like the choice that you made, and there might be a result that I can't rescue you from, but I'm not going to pile on to that because we're committed to honesty in our house. And so we talked through that, and the reality is I'm always on your side. I'm always rooting for you. I'm always here to help. And so at the end of that, we went and I helped her learn how to clean up her room, right? And she learned, though, that it's not just like, don't be afraid to lie because you're going to get in trouble, because that's what happens. Kids chance lying because they think, well, I'm going to get punished one way or the other. Maybe if I lie, I'll get out of it, right? Because they just won't find out. But if we're committed to honesty, then we're building relationship and we're building trust. And so what does it look like to speak the truth in love? It means that we're always rooting for the other person. It's not just what we say, but how we say it, right? The words that we say, but also the when and where we say it. So sometimes you have to deliver hard news. Sometimes someone has hurt your feelings. Or sometimes you have failed someone else. Or sometimes something just didn't work and it broke down and maybe you have to let someone go. And when we're speaking the truth in love, we first consider, what words am I going to say? How am I going to say this in a way that I communicate that I'm rooting for you even in the midst of a hard thing? But we also consider when and where we say it. So like if you're married and your spouse does something that hurts your feelings, you need to talk to them about something, you don't do it in front of other people. Steve and I have this commitment that we don't do that in front of other people. We always take that offline. We address it offline. Same with Imogen and I with parenting. I don't do that in front of other people. We do that offline. At work, how do you commit to being honest but respecting that other person? How do you talk to them in a setting and a time that even if it's hard, you're showing that you love them? Because here's the thing about honesty is, yes, we are being transformed. We are being renewed and enabled to be honest, but it is a commitment on our part as well. And it's a commitment that moves us from, I am more important than you, my comfort, my needs, my desires, to we are essential to each other. And in order to show that, I am committing to being uncomfortable sometimes in the temporary in order to show how much you matter, in order to show you how important you are. I'm committed to living honestly with you. And that builds the foundation of trust. That builds this foundation where we can begin to say we belong to one another. And so I'm not going to do something that knowingly and willingly harms you just because it feels like it benefits me, because actually harming you harms me. That's the new ethic that we're given in Jesus. And we're able to build one another up and be renewed into who we were always created to be, someone who lives and loves in the way of Jesus. Let's pray. Gracious God, thank you so much for the fact that you have come to set us free and change us and deliver us. And we ask that you would continue to renew us in your image, Jesus, and that you would help us to make the hard choice to love even when it's hard, to be honest even when it might feel like it might cost us something. Help us to be honest in our own heart and in our words and our actions. We pray this in Jesus' name.